Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be deep diving into something kind of controversial.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Donald Trump's decision to pull the U.S. out of the World Health Organization.
The WHO.
Yep. And we've got a pretty interesting analysis of it all from Sky News Australia.
Okay, well, I'm interested to hear this. What do they have to say?
Well, their take on this whole Trump 2.0 thing is a little different than what we're used to.
All right, I'm ready. Let's get into it.
Okay, so right off the bat, Trump signed that executive order to withdraw on day one. Day one.
Oh, wow. So, like, right away. That's a statement for sure.
No kidding. I mean, it's not like this came out of nowhere. Trump has been pretty vocal about his issues with the WHO for a while now.
Yeah, especially after COVID. Didn't he call it like a corrupt globalist scam or something?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
But do you think there's maybe something more to it than just his past criticisms?
It's hard to say for sure, but you got to think the timing is interesting.
Right.
Look at what's happening globally. There's this wave of nationalism everywhere. Leaders are putting their own countries first, maybe even above global cooperation.
Yeah, that's true. You know, even here in Australia, Pauline Hanson is calling for us to follow Trump's lead and leave the WHO as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And she's always been pretty big on putting Australia first.
Makes you wonder, what if other countries start doing the same? What happens to the WHO then?
Yeah, especially countries that are close to the U.S.
It could really change how effective they are if a bunch of countries pull out. What do you think about that?
That's a great question. And speaking of different perspectives, Sky News Australia actually had their U.S. correspondent, Analise Nelson, on to talk about this.
Oh, I like her. She's got a good grasp on things, especially with Trump.
Right. She's covered him a lot.
Yeah.
So one thing she pointed out that I found really interesting was the way the media is covering Trump this time around.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, remember back in his first term, it was all chaos and unpredictability. Headlines everywhere about how unstable things were.
Yeah, I remember that.
She's saying that's mostly gone now. It's been replaced with this acknowledgement that he's got experience now.
Yeah.
Like he's not the new kid on the block anymore.
Interesting. Do you think that's true? Or is that just what the media wants us to think?
It's hard to say for sure, but I think there's definitely a shift in tone from at least some outlets.
Yeah, I think you're right, though there are still plenty out there that are very critical of him and his policies. It's not like everyone's suddenly on board with everything he does.
For sure. And it's not just the media either. Nelson also talked about a change in Trump himself. Like his tone is different. There's a sense of purpose now, she says, a real intentionality that maybe wasn't there before.
Do you buy that? Or do you think it's just, an act?
It's tough to say. It could be a genuine evolution. You know, he's learned from his first term and grown as a leader. Or it could just be a really well-crafted image to make him look more stable and competent.
I guess only time will tell on that one. But it's definitely worth keeping an eye on how he acts and how people react to it.
Definitely. And Nelson even argued that this new tone is being well received by the business community. Like, she pointed to things like gas prices, oil drilling, the stock market, things that directly impact people's wallets. She made it sound like Trump's onto something with this new approach.
Well, those are definitely things people care about.
Yeah.
If he can actually deliver on those promises, the economic growth, the stability, that would go a long way in solidifying his support,
Yeah, but of course, it's not that simple. Economic indicators are complex, and a lot of them are affected by things outside of any one person's control.
Yeah, it's never a simple equation.
Speaking of not simple, his new team, Team Trump 2.0, or whatever you want to call it, looks a lot different this time around.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, much more carefully selected, and I think that's going to have a big impact on how things go.
I agree. The people he surrounds himself with are definitely important. Who are some of the key players this time?
Well, for one, Susie Wiles, his campaign manager, is now a major part of the administration.
Wiles. Okay. Isn't she known for running a pretty tight ship?
Exactly. She's all about message discipline and controlling the narrative. No more leaks or off-the-cuff remarks. Everything's got to be on message.
I see. So you could look at this as Trump learning from the chaos of his first term, right? Trying to be more organized, more in control. But then again, some might say that stifles dissent or limits open communication.
That's a really good point. So we've got a more focused Trump, a new and improved team, and some early moves aimed at the economy. Even though it's early days, it's clear this is going to be a very different presidency than his first go-around.
I think that's a pretty safe bet to make. The big question is, how do these changes actually translate into policy? What's he going to do both here in the U.S. and on the world stage? And what will the long-term impact of those policies be?
Those are all great questions. And speaking of big questions, We need to circle back to this whole WHO situation. It was a big move, putting the U.S. out, and there are a lot of potential consequences. What are your initial thoughts? What could happen because of this withdrawal?
Well, there's a lot to unpack, right? We have to remember that the WHO is essential for global health efforts. Everything from disease surveillance to distributing vaccines.
Yeah.
You take away U.S. support, that could really hurt them, make it hard to respond to future pandemics or deal with ongoing health crises around the world. But at the same time, there are some legitimate concerns about the WHO. Are they really effective? Are they transparent enough? Especially after what happened with COVID-19.
You're right. It's complicated. There are valid points on both sides of the argument.
Yeah, it's not black and white at all. And if we really want to understand what could happen, we need to dig a little deeper, look into exactly what the WHO does, why Trump is criticizing them, and what the alternatives to U.S. involvement might be.
I agree. I think for our listeners, it's crucial that they really grasp what the WHO's mission is, their role in global health, and then how this withdrawal by the U.S. could affect their ability to actually carry out that mission.
Right. We also need to look at the arguments for and against the U.S. being involved and explore the potential outcomes. What could happen if they stay out? What could happen if they rejoin, both the good and the bad?
Exactly. It's a complex issue with a lot of different angles to consider. But if we break it down piece by piece, examine all the different perspectives, I think that'll help our listeners form their own informed opinions about it all.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to do it. Lay it all out there.
So let's do just that. First, let's take a closer look at the WHO itself, what they do, how they operate on a global scale, and then we can get into why Trump's criticizing them and whether or not those criticisms hold up.
Sounds good to me. Let's do it. All right, so let's dive into what the WHO actually does. They're involved in a ton of global health initiatives.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, disease surveillance, like we saw with COVID-19, tracking outbreaks and helping coordinate responses.
Right, makes sense.
They also run vaccination programs, help coordinate research, and set international health standards. It's a lot.
Wow, so they're kind of like, I don't know, the air traffic controllers of global health.
Yeah.
Making sure everyone's on the same page and working together.
That's a really good analogy. They don't actually have the power to force countries to do anything, but they do provide guidance, support, and a platform for collaboration.
But that's kind of what Trump's issue is, right? He says they're ineffective, too bureaucratic,
Right.
and basically beholden to countries like China instead of actually doing what's best for global health.
Yeah, and those criticisms have been around for a while. People have questioned the WHO's bureaucracy and how they're funded for years.
What do you mean?
Well, they rely a lot on voluntary contributions from member states, which means countries that donate more, well, they might have more sway.
Oh, I see. So Trump might have a point then.
There might be some truth to his claims, yeah. But is that the whole story? You have to consider what the WHO has accomplished. They've done a lot of good in the world.
Like what?
Eradicating smallpox. Almost completely wiping out polio, responding to countless disease outbreaks over the years. They've saved millions of lives.
Yeah, that's true. And let's be real, coordinating global health efforts, that can't be easy. It's not like we can just snap our fingers and replace the WHO overnight.
No, definitely not. Creating a whole new organization or just relying on individual countries making deals with each other, that would probably be even more complicated and maybe less effective.
So it's a tough situation. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Kind of.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a balancing act, trying to weigh the pros and cons.
Okay, so let's say the U.S. does pull out of the WHO for good. What happens then? What are the best and worst case scenarios?
Well, best case scenario, this is a wake-up call for the WHO. They take a hard look at themselves, make some reforms, address those criticisms we talked about. Maybe they become more efficient, more transparent.
Okay, and then what?
Maybe other countries step up and take a more active role in global health too. So it ends up being a net positive, kind of a shakeup that makes the system stronger.
That'd be great. But what about the other side of the coin? The worst case?
Worst case, things fall apart. Without the U.S. contributing money and leadership, the WHO struggles to keep its current programs running, let alone respond effectively to future pandemics.
And let's not forget how interconnected the world is now.
Exactly. A disease outbreak on one side of the planet can become a global crisis in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, we saw that firsthand with COVID. And who knows what the next pandemic will look like? It could be even worse.
Exactly. And if there's no coordinated global response, the consequences could be devastating.
So yeah, the stakes are pretty high.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond just the WHO itself. It's about the future of health cooperation, whether countries are willing to work together or not.
That's a good point. Okay, so we've covered what the WHO does and what could happen if the U.S. stays out. But what are the alternatives? What can the U.S. do if they're not working with the WHO? Go it alone. Build new partnerships.
Well, one option is focusing on bilateral agreements, basically making deals directly with individual countries or regional organizations instead of going through the WHO.
So one-on-one deals instead of working with this big global organization.
Exactly. And that has some advantages. It might give the U.S. more control over where their money goes and how it's used.
Right. But what are the downsides?
Well, you could end up with a patchy system where some countries get left out, and it would probably be a lot less efficient. Having to negotiate separate agreements with everyone they want to work with, that would be a logistical nightmare.
Yeah, I can see that. It's interesting, though, because the U.S. already does these kinds of bilateral agreements, right?
Yeah.
Even while being a member of the WHO.
That's right. It's not an either situation. It's more about shifting priorities.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about creating a whole new international organization? Like, is that even possible?
It's definitely possible, but it wouldn't be easy. It would take a ton of effort and coordination.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And it's not clear other countries would want to join, especially if it's seen as a U.S.-led initiative that excludes certain countries, like China.
So there are no easy answers here. It's
Yeah.
also interconnected, and every option has its own set of challenges.
Exactly. There's no perfect solution. It's about analyzing each approach, understanding the risks and benefits, and trying to find the best way forward.
And that's what we're trying to do here, right? Help our listeners navigate this complex issue and form their own informed opinions.
Precisely. We're not here to tell anyone what to think. We're providing information and context so they can think critically about these things.
Okay, I like that. Now, I want to circle back to something Analise Nelson said in that Sky News piece. Remember how she talked about tone? Not just Trump's tone, but the media's tone when covering him.
Yes, I remember.
I think that's really important, especially in our current climate where everything feels so polarized.
It really does. It's like everyone's just shouting at each other.
Exactly. It's impossible to have a productive conversation when everyone's on the defensive all the time. And especially when it comes to complex issues like global health, we have to be able to listen to each other, to understand different points of view and try to find some common ground.
Absolutely. We're all in this together, whether we like it or not. Pandemics, climate change, economic instability, these are global challenges that need global solutions.
And those solutions can only come from cooperation, from understanding,
Right.
from being willing to bridge those divides.
I completely agree. So how do we do that? How do we move past the shouting and have productive conversations about these complex issues?
Well, I think the first step is recognizing that there are valid points on both sides of almost every argument.
That's a good place to start.
We have to be willing to listen to those perspectives that are different from our own and really try to understand where those perspectives are coming from.
It's not about agreeing with everything everyone says, right? It's about finding common ground. That shared understanding that lets us actually work together.
Right. It's about focusing on what unites us, not what divides us.
Mm.
Even when we disagree, we can still respect each other and work towards a common goal.
And that's especially important when it comes to global health. We all want the same thing, ultimately. A world where everyone has access to good health care, where diseases are prevented and treated effectively, where people can live long and healthy lives.
Absolutely. And the only way to get there is through collaboration, not isolation. Through understanding, not judgment. We have to be willing to put our differences aside and work together for the greater good.
That's well said.
So, as we continue this deep dive into Trump's decision on the WHO, I want to encourage our listeners to think about this issue from all sides.
Yes, it's crucial to consider all the possible consequences of this decision, both the good and the bad.
And to really think about what role the U.S. should have in global health moving forward.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers. But by staying informed, engaging in thoughtful discussion, and considering different viewpoints, we can all play a role in creating a healthier future for everyone.
I think that's a great point to end on. It's all about being informed and engaged. This is a complex issue, but we can navigate it together.
I agree.
And on that note, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic and a fresh set of perspectives. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. It really makes you think, doesn't it? This whole thing, it brings up a much bigger question about national sovereignty versus global cooperation.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like, Countries have the right to make their own choices, but then there's this responsibility to work together on issues that affect everyone.
Absolutely. It's a balancing act that plays out all the time in international relations. And when it comes to global health, it's especially tricky.
How so?
Well, because like we've been talking about, a disease outbreak anywhere can quickly become a problem everywhere.
Right. It doesn't really respect borders.
Exactly. So even if a country feels like they can handle their own health issues, there's always that risk that something outside their control could come back and cause trouble.
It's like that saying, united we stand, divided we fall.
Right. Exactly. But of course, it's easier said than done. Every country has its own priorities, its own resources, its own way of doing things. Getting everyone on the same page, working together, it's a huge challenge.
You're telling me there's no guarantee that even with the best intentions, global cooperation will always work out.
That's true. But I still think it's something worth fighting for. Because the alternative, every country for itself, that's not a world I want to live in.
I agree. It sounds pretty bleak. So where do we go from here? What should people be thinking about as this whole situation plays out? What are the right questions to ask?
Well, I think it's crucial to stay informed about the real impact of this withdrawal. What's actually happening on the ground?
Like what kinds of things?
How is it affecting the WHO's budget and their ability to operate? What programs are being cut? What's happening with research efforts? We need to understand the consequences for global health.
Those are good points. I think it's also important to see how other countries react to this. Are they going to step up and fill the gap left by the U.S.?
Right. Are they forming new partnerships, strengthening the ones they already have?
Or is this the start of a more fragmented global health landscape?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
It really is.
And at the end of the day, I think it comes down to this. What kind of world do we want? A world where everyone is isolated, only looking out for themselves.
Or a world where we actually try to work together to solve these problems together.
Exactly, to create a healthier, more equitable future for everyone.
That's a really good way to put it. It's a choice we're all making every day. And those choices, they matter. They'll shape the world for years to come.
Absolutely. Every decision has an impact.
Well, on that note, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll be back soon with more fascinating topics to explore. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.